I'm Emily Miller, 29, the daughter who's expected to stay small, so the family picture looks perfect. Tonight, I stopped playing that part. At our Sunday table, David's bonuses and Laura's penthouse get a standing ovation. My work gets a smirk. Their favorite joke is me. Then they shoved a worthless lakehouse deed across a lawyer's glass table trash to them, a loaded key to me. That's when the game changed. Ever been written out of your own family story? Hit like if you've had to earn respect in silence. Comment if they only noticed you once the numbers spoke. It starts at one more Sunday dinner, the room rehearsed for their applause and my quiet. I sat at the long mahogany table in Robert and Margaret Miller's dining hall, beneath chandeliers that rained light across polished silverware. And I played my part, because no one expected otherwise. I sat at the long mahogany table in Robert and Margaret Miller's dining hall, beneath chandeliers that rained light across polished silverware. And I played my part, because no one expected otherwise. The house itself smelled of wealth, oak, paneled walls, velvet curtains, polished marble floors that gleamed with the effort of someone else's hands. I had grown up here, once, but now each return felt like stepping into an opera staged at my expense. Their laughter and voices bounced off the ceiling so high they could swallow secrets whole, and I carried one of my own, tucked deep inside where their arrogance could never touch it. I heard my grandfather's voice in my mind as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. Let them underestimate you. It buys you time. He had whispered those words years ago, when my cousins had mocked me for reading property listings instead of sports magazines. He had been the only one who saw potential in me, the only one who urged me to stay silent, to listen, to gather fuel from their derision. Tonight, his voice hummed in the back of my skull, steadying me as my family prepared to sharpen their knives with words. David leaned back in his chair, cufflinks catching the light, glass of red wine poised in his hand, as though he were delivering a sermon. "Close 2 million in gains this quarter," he said, letting the pause dangle until my mother gasped appreciatively. "Bank's been good to me. Perks of knowing when to move." His grin stretched too wide, the kind of smile you practiced in mirrors. Laura followed, her voice clipped and precise, her posture always a calculated picture of control. "Secured the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, 23rd floor. Views of the skyline at night that most people can't even dream of affording." She sipped her wine with the grace of someone drinking praise itself. My father's eyes gleamed. My mother clutched Laura's hand like it was spun gold. I tried to stay invisible. That was always safer. But invisibility only lasted until their eyes turned toward me, and soon enough they did. "And you, Emily?" my mother asked, a lilt of pity masked as curiosity. "Still doing your little online thing?" Her voice was sugar laced with arsenic. I smiled tightly, though the question cut deeper than she realized. Little online thing. To them, my work was always something diminutive, amateur, unserious. They never asked for details, never imagined I could possibly be building anything real. The silence was sharp enough to slice. Then came the laughter. Laura chuckled first, shaking her head as though the thought of me surviving on a little online thing was worthy of sitcom applause. My father smirked. David laughed loudest, pounding the table with the heel of his hand. The chandeliers trembled with the echo. "Careful, Dave," Laura said, still laughing. "She might surprise us yet." "Surprise us?" David grinned wolfishly. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for Emily's rent." He raised his glass, waiting for the roar. It came in waves. My mother covered her mouth as though to soften the cruelty, but her eyes gleamed. My father chuckled deeply, delighted with the joke. Laura's laughter was sharper, aimed to wound. David laughed until his face flushed. I sat still, back straight, fork resting on china, as though each sound was a pebble dropped into water. My chest burned, but not from shame. From memory. From determination. From the careful gathering of their every word. I had learned to let their ridicule settle inside me, not to crush me, but to harden me. In that cacophony of laughter, I thought of nights alone in my cramped apartment, staring at spreadsheets and contracts while others slept. I thought of the small victories no one knew about, the property bought cheap, the partnership papers signed under NDA, the meetings with people who mattered but whose names I'd never utter at this table. Every jab tonight was another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. My grandfather's voice echoed again steady, certain. "Let them underestimate you. It buys you time." And so I smiled faintly, the kind of smile they mistook for surrender. My glass tilted just enough to catch the chandelier's glow, and I let my words fall quiet, calm, certain. They think I'm broke. They have no idea. They shoved the deed across the table like they were dumping trash, never realizing they'd handed me a weapon. The attorney's office was cold, not in temperature but in atmosphere, the kind of place where lives were cataloged into line items, stripped down to ink and signatures. Thick carpet muted every step, walls lined with certificates framed in walnut, and a long glass table that reflected the pale spring light slanting in from behind the blinds. I sat at one end, posture careful, hands clasped together to hide their tension. My siblings sprawled opposite me as if the room itself had been built for them. David, still in his banker's suit, loosened his tie like he owned the air around him. Laura crossed her legs neatly, heels clicking as she adjusted, her blazer perfectly tailored, her gaze sharp enough to slice paper. My parents sat between them, expressions eager and calculating, their pride stitched visibly to their more successful children. The lawyer droned through the paperwork, his voice dry as parchment. Stocks, real estate shares, investment accounts. David leaned forward with every number, his grin broadening. Laura kept jotting notes, circling what she wanted with the precision of someone drawing battle lines. It was a feeding frenzy, masked under legal formalities. I watched in silence, my grandfather's voice whispering in my memory. This place has good bones and better secrets. He had said that about the old lakehouse when I was a girl, when no one else cared to visit. The roof had leaked. The windows rattled in the wind, but he had stood on the porch with his hand heavy on my shoulder, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. He had seen something more. And finally, the lawyer said, flipping to the last folder. The property at Lake Merritt. Laura snorted. You mean the shack? David chuckled. Money pit, you mean? Needs a new roof every decade. Septic's a nightmare. Taxes eat you alive. Let it rot. My father shook his head in mock regret. Your grandfather was sentimental about that place. Never understood why. We never used it. Maintenance alone cost a fortune. My mother waved a hand, weary. Honestly, let it go to the bank. None of you need that burden. I leaned forward, heartbeat steady. I'll take it. The silence snapped tight. Then came the laughter, sharp, dismissive, echoing in the sterile office. David's laugh was the loudest, pitched high with disbelief. You? You're volunteering for that mess? Laura arched a brow, lips curling in a smirk. Suit yourself. Don't say we didn't warn you. My parents sighed with relief, as though I had lifted a stone from their shoulders. The lawyer blinked once, shuffled papers, and pushed the folder toward me. Sign here, here, and here. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I signed with slow, deliberate strokes, my name flowing across the page, as if carving into stone. The deed slid across the slick glass toward me, edges crisp, weight deceptively light. David was already back to calculating his share of the stock portfolio. Laura leaned in to whisper with my mother, voices muffled but smug. They barely looked at me as the lawyer handed over the deed, as though I'd chosen scraps while they feasted. But I pressed the document to my chest, feeling the paper crinkle under my grip, my pulse thrumming through it. I knew what it meant. I knew what they had just given away. Thank you, Grandpa. I whispered inside my head, a private vow masked as a prayer. Out loud, my voice was steady, measured, carrying just enough softness to seem harmless. Thank you, Grandpa. They just made their biggest mistake. They stole my ideas, then laughed at me for dreaming them. The memory returned with a sting sharper than the first cut, a flash of polished silverware clinking against plates, and the stale scent of overbrewed coffee drifting across the brunch table. Mid-2021, the family gathered in that same grand dining room, sunlight bouncing off chandeliers, everything glimmering but me. I had spoken cautiously then, a little tremor in my voice, but conviction threading through it. There's opportunity in rundown houses. Buy low, fix them up, bring them back to life. People want stories, not just walls. My words hung in the air, fragile, waiting to be nurtured. David leaned back, napkin crumpled in his fist, and barked a laugh. Invest in rundown houses? That's fantasy, not finance. He turned my idea into a punchline, twisting it for the audience he always imagined himself playing to. Maybe Emily's planning to flip shacks on weekends with her pocket money. The table chuckled with him. Even Laura, ever poised, joined in with a sarcastic drawl. Sure, maybe she'll start a HGTV show. Broke girl builds dreams. The words stuck, cheap barbs that sliced deep. My parents smiled weakly, unwilling to defend me, content to let the hierarchy cement itself. I sat there with my fork idle, food cooling untouched, listening as David reframed my thought as a joke, laughing louder, his voice booming. Every detail of that moment burned into me: the curve of Laura's smirk, the dismissive tilt of my father's head, the faint sigh of my mother, as if embarrassed that I had spoken at all. Betrayal didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered across a polished table, disguised as humor. Summer 2022. My condo office hummed with a different rhythm. It was no grand mansion, just a modest two-bedroom with laminate floors that creaked under every step. But it was mine. The second room had transformed into my command center, dual monitors glowing blue light into the night, sticky notes taped across the wall in chaotic order, the air faint with the smell of takeout containers pushed aside. I leaned over my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code built websites that weren't flashy but functional, sturdy tools for clients who cared about results more than shine. My dashboard pinged quietly. Numbers climbing, small contracts turned steady retainers, partnerships stacking like bricks. Growth wasn't glamorous, but it was real, undeniable. The family's voices sometimes echoed in my head, Laura's sarcasm looping back, David's sneer cutting sharp. They thought humiliation would bury me. They didn't realize humiliation could also forge steel. The room was silent, except for the faint buzz of my monitor fan. My inbox chimed. A new email subject line gleamed bold. International investor inquiry, interested in call. For a moment, I froze, staring at it, heart hammering like it wanted to leap free. This wasn't a small client, not a side project. This was a door cracking open, light pouring through, the first glimpse of a horizon I had been crawling toward for years. I leaned back, chest rising slow, a smirk pulling at my lips. The silence of the condo wasn't empty. It was armor, a cloak that kept me hidden until I chose to strike. Let them laugh, I whispered to the glow of the screen. Voice steady, a promise curled in the shadows. Silence is my camouflage. Every ping from the family group chat was another cut, slicing deeper than they knew. The phone vibrated on the edge of my desk, screen flashing with a smug glow that seemed to mock me even before I read the words. Winter wrapped the city in silence, snow pressing against my condo windows, but inside, the buzzing wouldn't stop, like a hive of wasps drilling into my veins. The thread was supposed to be family updates, but it had always been David and Laura's private stage, with our parents clapping politely from the wings. Tonight, the theater was loud. David had just posted a picture, him leaning against a new Porsche, sunglasses on despite the snow, captioned with some crass joke about bonuses. The group exploded with emojis, Laura tossing in her approval like gasoline to fire. Then Laura's turn. A photo of her penthouse, skyline glittering behind glass walls, view tonight worth every penny. Hearts, clapping hands, champagne bottles rained down the chat. My mother's little thumbs up appeared, my father's terse impressive followed. Their admiration was reserved for those who already owned the world. And then, the dagger. David tagged me, bold letters lighting up. $50 says she asks Dad for rent this year. My chest tightened. The others laughed virtual laughter, crueler for its distance. Laura piled on almost immediately. I'll raise to $100, she can't even pay her phone bill. A stream of laughing faces cascaded after. I stared at the words, each one cutting sharper than the last. Paper cuts, all of them individually small, collectively bleeding me dry. I typed nothing. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, fingers trembling not with weakness but with the effort of holding still. They thought silence meant defeat. They never understood silence could mean sharpening. The messages kept coming, relentless. Vacation photos from St. Bart's, cocktails with umbrellas, toasts to their own brilliance. My parents watched without a word. No defense, no rebuke, just a silence that screamed louder than the ridicule. That silence told me where I stood, reminded me how little they cared to shield me. The screen's glow painted my face pale blue. I caught my reflection in the glass eyes hollow, lips pressed tight. For a moment, humiliation seared so hot it felt unbearable. But then, slowly, it cooled, solidifying into something else. Something harder. My chest no longer burned. It froze. I whispered to the empty condo, to the snow pressing its weight against the window panes, to the buzzing phone begging for me to break. Fine. Keep betting. I'll make sure you lose everything. I asked for $50,000 not because I needed it, but because I needed proof. The cursor blinked at the bottom of my email draft, its pulse almost mocking me as I read through the carefully arranged words one last time. I'd written it in a tone stripped of emotion, lined with bullet points, market projections, and crisp analysis, the kind of thing they respected or at least pretended to. I pressed send, and the silence that followed felt heavier than snow piling on a roof. The first response came from David, quick as a vulture. His email was laced with false cheer, every word dripping contempt. Throwing good money after bad, he wrote. The lakehouse is a liability. You'll sink more cash fixing the roof than you'll ever see back. He ended with a smug postscript. But hey, at least you'll have a hobby. Maybe you can start a YouTube channel about failing. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. The proof was collecting itself, line by line. Then Laura chimed in, her email clean and surgical, like a scalpel slicing me open without flinching. She broke down the ROI in percentages, depreciation schedules, tax implications. Dismissible, she concluded. At best, an emotional purchase, not a financial one. No exclamation marks, no laughter, just the cold precision of someone who had spent years turning her words into verdicts. An hour later, my phone rang. Father's name glowed across the screen. His voice, gruff and sharp, carried no warmth. Emily, this is unrealistic, he said. You can't expect us to bankroll your projects. You need to grow up and stop chasing fantasies. His words weren't loud, but the disappointment layered into them felt louder than shouting. I didn't argue. There was no point. Margaret never called. Instead, she forwarded David's email to me, untouched, with nothing but a single emoji beneath it. A sad face. Not sadness for me, of course. Sadness for the inconvenience of having me as her child. I closed the laptop. For a moment, the sting was sharp, raw, almost unbearable. But then, as the room settled into silence, something inside me shifted. The rejection didn't weaken me, it calcified me. They had given me exactly what I asked for. Proof. Proof that their support was an illusion, that their love came with conditions, that I had no family in them, only obstacles. I dragged their emails into the trash and clicked delete forever. The screen went blank, the cursor stopped blinking, and the silence felt like freedom. I leaned back in my chair, lips curving into the faintest smile, and whispered into the empty room. Perfect. Now the stage is set. If they thought it was just a shack, I would build an empire on its bones. The words pulsed in my head as the elevator doors slid open, revealing the 32nd floor of a sleek glass tower. Evelyn's office smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender, a quiet defiance against the noise of the city below. The receptionist barely glanced up as she waved me toward the glass-walled conference room, where a stack of documents weighted like bricks to a foundation no one else believed I could build. Evelyn herself was already there, posture straight, expression calm but sharp, the kind of woman who never wasted words. She gestured to the chair across from her. Emily, she said, sliding a folder forward, this is the framework for Better Bones Holdings LLC. Once you sign, the lakehouse deed transfers under its umbrella. That shield protects you from personal liability. More importantly, it gives you the structure to expand. I ran my hand over the embossed title Better Bones. My grandfather's voice echoed from memory. This place has good bones and better secrets. A part of me wondered if he knew, all those years ago, what I'd be doing now. Evelyn tapped the first page. You'll need to initial here, here, and here. Then we'll move to the signature lines. What you're doing is shrewd, Emily. Most people your age don't think long-term like this. They sell. You're protecting, consolidating. That's strategy. I nodded, pen trembling only slightly in my hand. As I moved through the pages, my chest tightened with a cocktail of fear and resolve. Each stroke of ink was more than a legal necessity. It was a declaration. That house, the one they mocked, the one they shoved at me like trash, would now be the seed of something they couldn't laugh away. Evelyn paused halfway through to pour water into 2 glasses. I want you to remember, she said, voice firm but kind. Holding companies aren't glamorous. They're invisible walls. But those walls are what protect empires. You're doing something most overlook. You're building on foundations before the spotlight finds you. I thought of David, with his million-dollar boasts, of Laura, slicing me open with sarcasm, of my parents' silence. They had underestimated me so deeply that their rejection had become the very stone on which I stood. And now, line after line, I was stacking those stones into a fortress. The final page slid before me, the signature line daring me to cross it. My pulse thundered as I pressed the pen to paper. With one slow, deliberate stroke, I carved my name into the future. Emily Miller, Managing Member, Better Bones Holdings, LLC. The ink bled into the fibers, permanent, undeniable. I slid the folder back to Evelyn, who gave a single approving nod. "Congratulations," she said. "You've just built your shield. Now, you can grow without looking over your shoulder." Gathering my bag, I stood and walked toward the glass door. The city stretched beneath me, its skyline a promise of what was possible. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass, steadier than I'd ever seen it. As I stepped into the hallway, my voice barely above a whisper, I let the words escape. Words meant only for myself. Let's see them laugh now. Silence was my disguise. Under it, I was building a fortune. The morning sun poured through the cafe's tall glass windows, tinting the marble tables with a golden sheen. I had chosen this place deliberately quiet enough for serious talk, upscale enough to set the tone. Downtown Chicago buzzed outside, but inside everything hummed low, softened by the clink of silver spoons and the hiss of the espresso machine. I sat poised, laptop closed, hands folded around a porcelain cup I barely sipped from. The performance of composure mattered as much as the facts on paper. Across from me, the investor scanned my pitch deck again, though he hardly needed to. His sharp eyes flicked over numbers, then back to me, as though testing whether I'd flinch under the weight of his silence. I didn't. His brow arched, the first crack in his mask of neutrality. "This model," he said finally, tapping the page. "It's lean, adaptable, and scalable. You're capturing undervalued assets, repositioning them, and you've built a digital infrastructure most startups fumble with. Emily, do you realize what this is worth?" I met his gaze evenly. "I do." He leaned forward, lowering his voice though no one was listening. "7 figures. That's the valuation I'd place today, before we even factor in expansion potential." He paused, as though savoring the words, testing to see if they landed. I kept my expression steady, my pulse steadying with it. Inside, a part of me wanted to laugh at the memory of my brother's jibes, my sister's sneers, my parents' silence. But I gave away nothing. "Numbers are only the beginning," I said. He studied me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're calm. Most people would be shouting this from rooftops. Why stay quiet?" The answer came easily, pulled from months of practice, of waiting, of sharpening. Because silence builds leverage. For a moment, the weight of the world settled between us. Then he extended his hand. The handshake was firm, deliberate, binding in a way no contract could match. I clasped it, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to signal victory without gloating. This wasn't luck, it was design. From the corner table, Evelyn caught my eye. She had been reviewing the paperwork quietly, letting me handle the theater of it. She gave the slightest nod approval, acknowledgement, confirmation that I had crossed another threshold. The conversation wound down with logistics, signatures to follow, lawyers to finalize the details. But the deal was secured. The fortune, silent and growing, was mine. I stepped out of the cafe, the city air crisp with early autumn, leaves swirling against the pavement. My phone buzzed, pulling me back. The family group chat lit up across the screen. David had just posted a photo of himself leaning against a Lamborghini, grinning like a man who believed the world belonged to him. The comments from Laura and my parents rolled in, predictable as ever. Admiration, awe, envy disguised as banter. I smirked, slipping the phone back into my pocket without a reply. They could have their noise. I had my silence, and in that silence, a fortune. One house wasn't enough. I wanted the entire shoreline. The words pressed against my ribs as the realtor pushed a manila folder across the desk, the smell of old carpet and polished wood filling the office. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying the sharp scent of leaves curling to ash. This little lakeside town had always been dismissed by my family as irrelevant, but I could see the potential in every sagging dock, every weather-beaten roof that overlooked the water. I signed the first contract with a steady hand, the scratch of the pen echoing louder in my ears than it should have. The realtor, a wiry man with glasses sliding down his nose, leaned forward, smiling with the patience of someone used to moving vacation cabins and half-forgotten fishing cottages. "Funny thing," he said, adjusting his tie. "Lakefront demand's been picking up. Folks from Chicago, Milwaukee city people are starting to see what's here. You've got an eye for timing." I kept my expression neutral, though inside the fire burned. Timing had always been my secret weapon, timing and silence. Gus sat in the corner, his work boots scuffed, his forearms crossed like steel beams. He wasn't much for words, but his presence grounded me. When the second folder came, he muttered, "Your grandfather would be proud." He always said these shorelines had more value than anyone realized. He'd be grinning ear to ear to see you locking them down. The ache of missing Grandpa Thomas swelled for a moment, but I swallowed it. I couldn't afford sentimentality, not now, not when every signature was another step toward an empire. The realtor shuffled papers, murmuring dates and clauses. I initialed, signed, sealed. Each piece of land stitched itself to my holdings, expanding the invisible reach of Better Bones. Outside, the lake glittered under the autumn sky, whispering of futures only I seemed willing to believe in. Yet whispers of another kind floated, too. In town, as I left the office and walked down Main Street, I heard fragments of conversations. The Millers? Didn't they abandon that place? Heard someone bought the old property, fixing it up. Wonder who's got the money now? Their voices trailed behind me like smoke. I didn't stop, but I carried those words home, each one fuel to the quiet blaze inside me. Back in my car, I stared at the deeds stacked neatly on the passenger seat. The ink was still fresh, binding, undeniable. My holdings stretched wider than my siblings could imagine, their mockery turning more irrelevant with every passing day. The phone buzzed suddenly, shattering the silence. Laura's name lit up the screen. My thumb hesitated before answering, because Laura didn't call without a reason. She schemed, calculated, always 2 steps ahead in her own mind. Her voice slid through the line, crisp as ever, each syllable honed like a blade. "Emily, we need to talk about Grandpa's estate again." The air in the car thickened. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening, knowing this wasn't a conversation she had any right to begin. Yet the words hung there, ominous, unavoidable, promising that the shoreline I had just claimed was about to become contested ground. When they smelled money, the same mouths that mocked me began circling back. The restaurant glowed with polished brass and warm candlelight, its air thick with the hum of conversations stitched together by clinking glasses. I had agreed to the meeting not because I needed them, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go once greed began to gnaw at their polished veneers. Laura arrived first, sliding into the leather booth opposite me, her blazer sharp enough to cut glass. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "Emily," she began, voice low and controlled, "we need to revisit the estate. There are certain legal technicalities that might not have been fully explored when the lakehouse was assigned to you." Her tone wrapped the word assigned in disdain, as though my inheritance was a clerical accident waiting to be corrected. David joined moments later, his cologne wafting ahead of him, his grin careless. He ordered a bourbon before even saying hello, then leaned across the table, flashing his teeth. "Look, Em, you've done, well, whatever it is you've done. But maybe the lake house is better off with me managing it on your behalf, of course. Maintenance, renovations, permits, you know, the grown-up stuff." I sipped my water slowly, letting silence stretch just long enough to make David squirm. "I think I can handle grown-up stuff," I said, voice even. Laura adjusted her cufflink, eyes narrowing. "It's not about management, Emily. It's about legality. The deed may be vulnerable. There are whispers about the original trust language. I'd hate for you to get caught in a tangle you can't undo." Her words dangled like bait, but I wasn't biting. Instead, I watched them, the way sharks circle when they sense blood. Except this time, it wasn't blood, they'd smelled money. David's smirk slipped for the briefest moment. Then he forced a laugh. "You know what's funny? Rumor says that dump is worth millions now. Millions." He shook his head as though it were absurd, but his eyes glittered with hunger. The silence that followed carried more weight than any of their laughter ever had. I saw the recognition flicker in Laura's eyes, the calculation sharpening behind her practiced expression. They had tossed me scraps, only to realize those scraps had turned into gold. I set my napkin on the table, rising slowly, deliberately. "Funny," I said, meeting their eyes one by one, "how you only call when money's involved." Their faces froze, caught between indignation and dawning fear of what they'd lost. I didn't wait for their response. I walked out into the late fall air, the city lights washing the sidewalk in cold brilliance. Behind me, I knew their schemes were only beginning, but for the first time, the power tilted in my direction. And they could feel it. If they wanted proof of my failure, I'd give them proof of their blindness. The Everest restaurant sat like a crown atop the Chicago skyline, its glass walls catching December's brittle light. I stood at the reception desk, my breath calm, though the number on the reservation screen was obscene to anyone still clinging to modest wallets. The manager, in his tailored suit and crisp tie, reviewed my request with professional detachment, though I caught the flicker of curiosity when my credit card slid across the counter without hesitation. "A private room for 6, Miss Miller," he confirmed, his pen moving smoothly across the leather reservation ledger. "Sunday evening, 7 o'clock. We'll prepare the chef's tasting menu. Wine pairing as well?" "Yes," I said, my voice even. The full experience. The signature left my hand firm, deliberate. It wasn't the food I was buying, it was the stage. Every detail, from the decanted vintages to the velvet chairs, would serve as backdrop for the reckoning my family had unknowingly walked themselves into. Back in my car, the city lights flickering across the windshield, I opened the family group chat. My fingers hovered for only a second before I typed, "Dinner's on me next Sunday. Everest, my treat." The message sent, its digital chime loud in the silence of the cabin. For a moment, nothing came. Then David, "Are you sure?" Followed quickly by Laura, "Do you even know what that costs?" Their disbelief was a performance in itself, predictable, shallow, almost comforting in how little they had changed. Robert finally chimed in with a curt, "That's unnecessary, Emily." Margaret's typing bubble lingered before disappearing. Then her call came, her voice soft and lined with nerves. "Emily, dear," she said carefully, "are you certain you can afford this? Everest isn't well. It's not a casual place. We wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words press against my chest. It wasn't concern. It was fear of spectacle, of the family name tarnished by a daughter stepping out of line. "Yes, mother," I replied, my tone clipped, steel wrapped in silk. "Everest, my treat." There was silence on the other end, then a weak sigh. "Very well." The call ended, and I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes steady, mouth set in the faintest of smiles. The woman staring back was no longer the family's punchline. "Time to end this game," I whispered. The city's skyline shimmered beyond the glass, each tower a witness to the stage I had just set. This wasn't just dinner. This was Judgment Day, dressed in crystal and candlelight. And for the first time, I held every card. They entered expecting to save me. They didn't realize they were stepping onto my stage. The maitre d' held the door open with a quiet flourish, and my family spilled into the Everest private dining room like strangers in a cathedral. Their gazes flicked upward at the vaulted ceilings, to the floor-to-ceiling glass where the Chicago skyline gleamed beneath December's frost. Candles shimmered against polished crystal. The table a spread of silver and linen, so immaculate it reflected their own unease back at them. David was the first to break the silence. "Wow," he muttered, low enough to sound casual, but edged with disbelief. "Guess the coupon book finally ran out of Olive Garden specials, huh?" His smirk widened when Laura shot him a sharp look, though she didn't contradict him. Laura leaned toward Margaret as if to whisper privately, though her voice carried easily in the hushed room. "This is ambitious. Emily doesn't exactly belong in places like this. Maybe we should keep an eye out, in case she, well..." She left the thought dangling, a neat dagger disguised as concern. Robert gave a heavy exhale, sliding his hands into his pockets. He dressed formally, but unease clung to him like a second suit. His eyes darted to mine, then to the vast city view, as though searching for an exit in a room with none. Margaret stayed silent, her smile brittle, but her eyes betrayed the same doubt. "What is she doing here?" I said nothing. I had no need to defend myself. Their arrogance was the rope. All I had to do was watch them pull it tighter. The waiter arrived with vintage Bordeaux, the bottle's label so rare I saw David's pupils contract. The cork popped, the deep red liquid poured, and I caught his reflection in the glass wall, a predator trying to mask sudden hunger. He chuckled, swirling the wine, aiming his barb straight at me. "Guess you're not used to meals like this, Emily. Careful. Don't max out your cards." The laughter from Laura was too sharp, like glass breaking. Margaret forced a chuckle. Robert coughed as if clearing the discomfort away, but none of them looked at me directly. They thought the punchline had landed. I lifted my glass slowly, the candlelight tracing its curve. My eyes met each of theirs in turn, calm, unblinking, steady as the city that glittered below us. My smile was thin, deliberate, carrying the weight of everything I'd built in silence. "You'll see." Every dish they tasted was another seed of doubt I planted. The first course arrived in silence, lobster bisque crowned with creme fraiche, steam curling upward in delicate tendrils. The waiters moved like shadows, Their presence felt only in the soft clink of silverware placed perfectly before each of us. My family eyed the bowls as though they carried secrets too rich for me to afford. David broke the silence, as I knew he would. Markets are ruthless right now, he announced, his spoon clattering deliberately as if punctuation. But I doubled my position in tech stocks before the surge. Another 7 figures this quarter. His eyes slid toward me, daring me to measure my life against his numbers. Laura followed smoothly, never letting the spotlight dim. Big win in court last week. Multi-million settlement. The firm was ecstatic. She sipped her wine as though swallowing liquid victory. I stirred my bisque once, lifted the spoon, and let the taste linger before answering softly. That's impressive. No more, no less. The calmness in my voice was unshakable, and that was precisely what unsettled them. The next dish, duck confit, crisp to perfection, arrived, and conversation faltered. Robert attempted small talk about weather, about renovations to their home, but his words stumbled into the silence that followed each of my quiet nods. My stillness wasn't defensive anymore. It was deliberate, a mirror showing them their own unease. Margaret finally broke. Her fork trembled as she set it down, her voice cracking through the tension. "Emily, dear, are you sure you can afford this?" She gestured vaguely to the gleaming room, the city beyond, the perfection of it all. It's a lot. Be realistic." The table froze. David's smirk faltered. Laura's eyes narrowed, calculating. Robert shifted uncomfortably, staring into his glass. I placed my napkin gently on my lap, leaned back in my chair, and let a slow smile spread. My voice carried no defensiveness, no desperation, only certainty. "Don't worry, Mom. The bill's already taken care of." The words slid across the table like a blade wrapped in velvet. Confusion flickered instantly. David's brows pulled together. Laura's smirk collapsed. Margaret's lips parted in half-formed protest. For the first time, the certainty they wore like armor cracked, and I saw the first glimmer of fear beneath. The silence was louder than their laughter when I laid the black card on the table. The final course had been cleared delicate chocolate soufflés that collapsed beneath the weight of warm ganache, and the air in the Everest dining room had thickened with expectation. My family leaned back in their chairs, eyes darting toward the door where the waiter disappeared. They were waiting for the grand finale, but in their version of the story, it was a collapse. They wanted to see me stumble, to watch the mask slip, to witness the humiliation they had always promised themselves was inevitable. The waiter returned, silver tray in hand, and with a subtle bow placed the leather-bound folio directly before me. His posture was deferential, a quiet acknowledgement that the decision of payment was never in doubt. To my siblings, though, that simple gesture must have looked like a trap snapping shut. David smirked, leaning forward. "Careful, Emily," he muttered, his voice low enough to feel like a shared joke with Laura. "This isn't a drive-through tab." Laura's eyes gleamed, sharp as knives. She tilted her head, waiting. Margaret reached for Robert's hand beneath the table, her knuckles white against his palm. I didn't hurry. I didn't even glance at the bill. Instead, I reached into my clutch, pulled out the sleek matte black card, and set it gently across the folder. The table caught the weight of it with a soft click, subtle yet deafening. The shimmer of its embossed letters was unmistakable in the candlelight. The waiter inclined his head without hesitation. "Of course, Miss Miller." He took the card with practiced respect, as though this scene had played out countless times before with people who belonged here. But in this moment, belonging was the very thing that fractured the air around us. The reaction was instant. David's smirk shattered, his lips parting in disbelief. Laura's breath hitched audible, sharp, unguarded. Robert blinked hard, as though trying to reconcile the daughter he dismissed with the reality reflected in front of him. Margaret looked stricken, her mouth trembling around words she couldn't summon. The silence was a vacuum, heavy, unrelenting. For once they had no laughter to throw at me, no jibe to hide behind. I folded my hands calmly on the table, my posture composed, my gaze steady. To them, this card was more than plastic. It was access, power, proof of everything they had denied me. It was the mirror turned back at their arrogance. The waiter returned moments later, but he wasn't carrying only the receipt. In his hand were 2 sealed envelopes, embossed with the Everest crest. He laid them beside my plate, bowing once more before retreating. Their eyes followed the envelopes, then flicked back to me, unease tightening into fear. And I only smiled. But I wasn't done. The real blow came in 2 white envelopes. The Everest dining room had fallen into the kind of silence that thrums in the chest, more deafening than sound itself. The black card had already cut through their illusions, but what followed was the real fracture, the crack that would never mend. The waiter reappeared, posture impeccable, silver tray gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Upon it rested 2 crisp envelopes, the ivory paper sealed with the Everest crest. He placed them carefully in front of me, his voice calm and deliberate. "The updated deeds, as requested, Miss Miller." Laura reacted first, quick as ever when legal paper was involved. Her hand shot forward, snatching one of the envelopes, fingers tearing it open with a desperation that betrayed her calm facade. The rustle of the paper was loud in the still air. Her eyes scanned the pages, widening, then hardening in disbelief. Words she had spent her career weaponizing were now her undoing. Better Bones Holdings, LLC. She mouthed the name silently, then finally spoke it aloud as though it burned. David leaned across the table, trying to grab the document from her. "That shack? Don't tell me. That shack is worth millions?" His voice cracked, teetering between outrage and terror. His smug confidence dissolved, leaving only the naked realization that he had laughed away a fortune. Robert cleared his throat, but no sound followed. Margaret clutched her pearls, the gesture too theatrical, too fragile, as though she were trying to hold on to the illusion of control that was already gone. The second envelope sat untouched, a silent sentinel of further humiliation. I slid it toward Evelyn, who had just entered quietly, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. She opened it with precision, reviewing the paperwork with a lawyer's eye before offering a small, knowing smile. "All properly transferred," she said, her tone firm, unshakable. "Everything has been moved under Better Bones Holdings, LLC, airtight and legally binding." Her gaze swept the table like a judge delivering a final verdict. I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of their dawning comprehension. My voice was even, without triumph or rage, sharp only in its truth. Grandpa was right. It had good bones. The words landed like a hammer. The phrase they had mocked, the place they had discarded, the inheritance they had sneered at suddenly. It was the foundation of an empire that belonged to me alone. And then the final stroke came. The door to the private dining room opened, and a sharply dressed man entered, his presence commanding but not intrusive. The investor. His arrival was brief, perfectly timed. He walked directly to me, extended his hand with easy confidence, and smiled. "Looking forward to our site visit next week, Miss Miller?" I rose and clasped his hand firmly. His departure was as swift as his entrance, but the damage had been done. My family sat frozen, horror etched across their faces, the truth undeniable. They had crowned me the broken one. Tonight I had buried the crown at their feet. Their crowns of superiority cracked right there on the linen tablecloth. The grandeur of Everest's dining room had dimmed into something hollow, like a theater after the curtain falls. Crystal glasses stood half empty, untouched desserts congealed at the edges of porcelain plates. Yet the silence was louder than any laughter they had once weaponized against me. The city lights beyond the glass shimmered like an audience, indifferent but watchful. David shifted first, his hands restless against the table as though clawing for fragments of the authority he no longer held. His voice came uneven, stripped of arrogance. "Maybe we could partner. Combine forces, for the family." His words sounded like ash. The same man who had bet on my failure was now scrambling for relevance. Laura leaned in quickly, her lawyer's tone reassembling like armor. "There may be technicalities, Emily. Transfers like these can be challenged, contested, even delayed." But Evelyn was ready. She slid a folder across the table with a measured calm, each page stamped, sealed, and signed. "Everything is ironclad," she said firmly. "No loopholes, no reversals, not without Emily's consent." The authority in her voice closed the matter before it began. Robert finally found his tongue, though his tone was foreign even to himself, half pleading, half proud. "We may have underestimated you, sweetheart. It takes grit to do what you've done." Margaret followed quickly, her smile brittle, her words coated with desperation. "Yes, dear. We always knew you had potential. We're just so glad you found your way." Their sudden warmth was suffocating, a performance rehearsed too late. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You called me poor every Sunday," I said, steady and unflinching. "Tonight, I let the receipts speak." My words cut through them like glass, each syllable undeniable. The investor, still seated quietly at the corner, inclined his head with a knowing smile. His presence was a silent verdict, a confirmation of the empire already in motion. He didn't need to say a word, the weight of his acknowledgement was enough to seal their fate. I leaned back slightly, letting the gravity of the moment settle before delivering the final stroke. Better Bones is expanding, I said with even clarity. 3 more properties are already under contract. Investors arrive next week for the tour. The declaration was not boastful. It was a statement of fact, a future carved in stone. David's jaw slackened. Laura's eyes darted desperately between Evelyn's folder and my face. Robert's hand tightened on his glass, and Margaret sat frozen, lips parted as if a prayer might spill but never would. They looked like royalty stripped of their crowns, sitting in rags invisible only to themselves. I rose slowly, the soft scrape of my chair against the marble floor marking the end of their reign. The room seemed to exhale as I stood, and I let my final words fall with the weight of inevitability. I wasn't broke. I was building. And I'm not done yet. The city beyond glimmered colder, sharper, as though it too bore witness to the shift. Their crowns had shattered, but mine was forged in silence and it fit perfectly. The night ended not with fury, but with the quiet collapse of arrogance under the weight of truth. The family that once mocked and dismissed her saw their crowns shatter, while the outcast rose as the rightful victor. Justice had not come swiftly, but when it arrived, it proved unshakable, a reminder that when injustice meets steadfast courage, the verdict can echo for a lifetime. Sometimes the smallest step of resolve is enough to change a fate once trampled. Like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt the same fire of justice, or 2 if the ending left you wanting more.